So that brings us nicely into Strats, and as I said, the Fender Stratocaster is the most popular guitar of all time, the most popular design of all time, the most popular body design of all time. It's not as much about distinctive tone as it is about its sonic versatility.
It can do everything.
It excels in every musical genre. Every genre you can play a Strat and you'll be fine. If you bring a Strat, you're going to be good. If you're playing jazz, if you're playing surf music, if you're playing heavy rock, you can do everything with a Strat. From Buddy Holly and the Beach Boy clean, all the way up to Yngwie levels of gain and crunch, you can do that with a Strat. It's not as distinctive in its range, but at moments it's very distinctive. Okay, it will retain its own sound, but because of its versatility, it doesn't have quite the distinction of maybe a Les Paul or a Telly, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary.
I do think that the positions that engage like both the middle and the top and the middle and the bottom, like that those sounds are quite unique and recognizable, though.
Yeah, there's a quack, they say. You don't get it so much when you're overdriving it in heavy rock and metal, but there's a Fender Strat sort of quack that you can get. You heard it a little on one of the Jeff Beck tracks, but I mean it's you get that sort of sound that is sort of indicative of a Strat in that respect. Strats also, by the way, respond better than any other design to customization. Eddie Van Halen was not the first person to put a humbucker in a Strat, but when he did, he launched a whole other design trend, which became known as the Super Strat. and the Super Strat is a Strat-bodied guitar configured with whatever the hell kind of pickup and tremolo system you want in it. And in the 80s, the Super Strats ruled the metal scene, and they're still popular because they're still a very reliable way for guitarists to get a humbucker sound in a lighter, more comfortable design and have a tremolo as well. So, you saw the advent of that in the 80s. It also became a personalization thing because you could have, any kind of custom paint job you wanted on the Strat, and it'll look good. No, you don't want to take a Les Paul with a gorgeous burst top and paint a dragon on the front of it or something like that.
And then you had the Ibanez ones and the ones that Steve Vai made with the hole in it that had
right,
like
exactly. Those are all variations on Strats in one way or another. Even though that they have, they're using much more modern technology, and they're using different kinds of neck profiles that are much easier to play than the originals.
The super flat necks and the wide flat.
Yeah. That became we're talking about designs that are 70 years old now, a lot of them close to 70 years old, and they're still popular, and everything that came since is still sort of based on them one way or another. You can look at the Ibanez Gem and Satriani's guitar, and you don't have to look too far to realize it's still a variation on a Strat, and it's got a humbucker in it, and it's got a tremolo on it.
Yeah.
But it's still got the Fender scale length. It's still got the aspects. You can see the ancestry in the Strat, and the holy grail for guitars was always to get both authentic Fender and Gibson sounds out of one guitar, right? That was the thing that everybody, just like with the amps, they wanted to, they want to get the tone at low volume. Well, with guitars, the holy grail was, can I get one guitar that'll give me both Fender and Gibson sounds? And in my opinion, you can't do it yet. You still can't do it. Okay. Not really authentically. Super Strats don't totally sound like Gibsons.
They don't.
But the humbuckers give them some of those Gibson characteristics.
But they sound like Super Strats. That's what they sound like. They're kind of their own thing, in my opinion.
They are. But, they do have a humbucker sound in most cases, right? And if you coil cut that humbucker, you can get a Fender sound out of them. Thus, you can sort of
Yeah.
get the best of both worlds, but it doesn't sound like a Les Paul.
No. No.
It may sound Gibson-ish, but the scale length makes it sound different, and the fact that generally speaking, if you have a Floyd Rose tremolo on it, that has a tonal factor that you can often hear.
Yeah.
Guitars with those things on them tend to be recognizable if you know what you're listening for.
Yeah. Explain what a Floyd Rose tremolo is for those who don't know.
So first,
Or what a tremolo is to begin with.
So the tremolo is what people commonly call the whammy bar or the wang bar. It's a lot of what you hear on a lot of Van Halen songs. It's the thing that makes the dive bomb sounds and those kinds of sounds. And the problem with the early ones, the best ones for years and years, from the 50s to like the late 70s, Fender had the best tremolo system with the Strat. And the problem with it was, if you tend to go crazy on that tremolo bar, you go out of tune on your guitar.
So yeah, if you pull on it or push it, you can like make the string.
You can do this. You can make this great dive bomb sound.
Yeah.
Right. But when you come back to where it's at its neutral position, you may be out of tune.
Yes.
So in the late 70s, this guy named Floyd Rose created a tremolo system that had a locking nut, which means the part that goes up by the tuners of the guitar will lock the strings down in a way such that when you play with the whammy bar, theoretically, you still stay in tune. It works pretty well.
Yeah.
You have to go pretty bonkers to go out of tune with one of those. The problem with that is it's cumbersome in other ways. If you're not using the bar a lot, it's not worth having.
Yeah, so basically you lock the strings at the top of the neck with
Yep.
nuts, and at the bottom you also lock them, and then you have little dials. You can tune them on the bottom because they're locked on the top, so you can still micro adjust them. But I have
Did your guitar that you showed me have that on it?
No, it had it has a string through body design.
Oh,
but
okay.
But I do have an Ibanez that has that system, and it's a lot of fun.
Right.
But
Right.
it's more cumbersome and a pain in the ass than that it's
right.
fun.
If you break a string,
oh my
live,
god, yeah,
you're done with that guitar. You have to hand it to a tech and put on another guitar. You can't change the string quickly.
yeah,
It's really for those people who have made the tremolo system a intricate part of their style, like Eddie Van Halen did.
yeah, yeah. What's a great example of some crazy tremolo work that I can pull up?
Where does Van Halen go craziest on his trem?
That's a good question.
Is it on Eruption? Now the thing is, on the first album, he's using a vintage Fender tremolo. He's not using a Floyd Rose on the first album.
I think Steve Vai also goes pretty nuts on that thing.
Yeah, but where? What? I mean,
I'm also trying to
sure
think.
Which songs.
I mean, in Eruption, there's some parts where he just kind of like goes all the way down and up. I mean,
yeah, I think that's a fair enough sort of place to go, but that's not a Floyd Rose. That is a whammy bar dive bomb. Yeah. That kind of thing.
So he pushes the thing all the way down to the point where the string almost just gets loose, pulled into the magnet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So anyway, Super Strats, like I said, they were very popular in the 80s. They still are popular with people who love this style because it does give you sort of, you can come close to the best of both worlds. And, you can, for example, do coil cutting. You can put humbuckers in one position. You can put single coils in the other position and things like that. And you can get sort of any kind of custom design you want in that, and uh, you know, it's easier to customize those guitars than pretty much anything else.
Right.
But one other approach to trying to get both the Fender and Gibson tones was Paul Reed Smith, and they have been selling guitars since the day they opened, based on the concept that they think they can get, or at least approximate, both, Fender and Gibson tones. I don't personally buy it. Even their single cut models that are supposed to go after the Les Paul tone don't quite get there because they don't have the Gibson scale length.
So that was their so, was that really their claim? Like that was their
I think it was an implied claim.
okay. To me,
I don't know
they've
if
always
they.
been kind of their own thing. I mean, they're super gorgeous and super expensive, but and
Yeah, and they were very well made, but they're not using a Gibson scale length and they're not using a Fender scale length. They're in between. So as a result, they've created sort of a hybrid sound that, while it's not a bad sound, to my ears, it really doesn't quite get either of the other things. Um, you know, I think the idea was, we want to make the one, we want to try and go after that holy grail of getting both Fender sounds and Gibson sounds out of one guitar. So they put the scale length right between the two,
interesting. I didn't know that.
and they made it, with, it's got a tremolo system, it's got some Gibson-ish sort of things, and it's got some Fender-ish sort of things, and but it's also their own thing, and they made some, some upgrades of things that were, you know good ideas actually put into production. But the thing is, I've been to jams with my old Les Paul, and I've stood next to guys who had like shiny new Paul Reed Smith guitars that they thought sounded like a Les Paul, until you start playing next to me with a real Les Paul. And it was like, these guys would have these gorgeous new Paul Reed Smiths, and they're thinking, they're getting this big fat Gibson Les Paul tone, and then I'd plug in next to them with a real Les Paul, and their faces would drop, you know. And it's the old, it's the fat free potato chip thing again. It tastes pretty good until you A/B it against the real chip, right? And you know, so Paul Reed Smith, they did create a really interesting new design that, whatever they were trying to do, they created a really great guitar that is, in its own right, has its own sound.
Yeah, I always looked at it as its own thing, really.
Yeah, I think, that's good. You're a little younger than I am, and you would probably hear it as such, but it was no secret that when they came out, they were trying to put, maple tops on mahogany bodies that were as nice as the Gibsons. And even though they started out doing double cutaways, they started doing the PRS single cut shortly after, and they made the body as thick as a Les Paul finally, and they put the maple cap on it, and they were going for that Les Paul sound. And despite what they did, I don't think they quite got there, because they didn't change the scale length.
And that's probably the secret sauce that makes a Gibson, right? Or Les Paul rather.
Pretty much. Now, the way we talk about these things, there's a lot of guitars out there that are pretty much copies of the original designs we've been talking about. And to my ears, the guitars that back in the 70s and early 80s sounded most like Les Pauls were the ones that stole the important design aspects and didn't do the compromises that Paul Reed Smith did. Things like the Ibanez Artist and the Yamaha SG-2000. You don't see them much anymore, because most people these days, you can get a cheaper Les Paul. But back in the 70s, it was either a Les Paul Standard or a Les Paul Custom, pretty much. And they were like the top of the line guitar. And most people, if you couldn't afford them and you wanted that sound, you could get one of these two Japanese alternatives, and they got the tone because they had the same thickness. They had the maple, same thickness of mahogany. They had the maple cap, but they also copied the scale length.
So hold on, you said the Yamaha S2000?
SG 2000.
SG2000.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So both of these were like very much Les Paul like guitar designs, except they were both double cutaway instead of single cutaway.
Let's see, I'll share my screen with you. Okay.
Yeah. So you see, it's got the same. You can tell it's based on a Les Paul. You look at the thing, and everything else about it is like a Les Paul. You can see that it's got the same thickness. It's got the maple cap. It's got the same configuration with the bridge. Everything about it is very much like a Les Paul, except that it's got two cutaways.
It doesn't.
Right?
It doesn't quite look as right as a Les Paul, but that's, I guess, I'm used to that. But
right, it certainly doesn't. But and if you look at the Ibanez artist, you'll see pretty much the same looking guitar, except it's less pointy on the cutaways.
And it's made in Japan, so it's undoubtedly fantastic.
Yeah.
Are they expensive to get a hold of, the ones from that era?
So back in the day, I remember a friend of mine walked into a music store in 19...
Ibanez artist, you said, right?
Yeah. So you see it's the same thing, but with a rounded sort of...
Right.
A more rounded cutaway.
This one looks better, I think, though.
Yeah, I thought they looked better, too. I thought they were prettier. And I knew guys who played them, and they sound just like Les Pauls. But you don't see them very much anymore because now Gibson makes cheaper Les Pauls, right?
If you show up with this to a jam, though, people are going to think it's cool.
Perhaps.
I mean, the guitar nerds are going to be...
Yeah. But, the thing is, when I was 16 years old, and my friend and I went into a music store, and he walked out of the music store with a Les Paul Custom that day, brand new off the shelf.
Yeah, right.
It was $800.
Oh my God.
In $1980. Okay. Now you could get one of these Ibanez artists or one of these Yamaha SGs for like $400 to $500 in that era. And now you can get a Les Paul Studio for like $400. So why would you bother with one of these? But
good point.
Back in those days, if you wanted a Les Paul sound and you didn't have the money, this is what you would get.
I wonder if they're expensive. Let's see what they do on eBay. Oh, they're between 1,000 and 2,000.
Yeah, they're good guitars. They're good guitars. They don't have anywhere near the resale value, obviously.
Yeah.
And by the way, prior to this, in the late 70s, Ibanez was making what they call the lawsuit guitars, where they would just put it in eBay, Ibanez lawsuit guitars.
They actually call them that? Oh, wow.
Those aren't them, though. What they were doing was they were copying Gibson designs. Try Ibanez lawsuit Les Paul.
Let's see. Oh, here we go. Pre-lawsuit era.
Yeah. See there, you got a 1977 Ibanez lawsuit Les Paul. It's basically an Ibanez copy of a Les Paul and then they got sued. And, they were, in some ways, at that time, they were making them better than Gibson was.
Oh, my God.
My friend had an Ibanez lawsuit Explorer made out of Carina wood. The thing was fantastic. I don't remember. He sold it, I think, when he was getting a real Les Paul. But that guitar, if it was still around, would be worth a lot of money because, Carina is one of those. It's a super mahogany that you can't get anymore very easily, and not too many things are made out of it. But yeah, so back in the day before they had, these Japanese companies like Orville and Bernie and.
Here's a Les Paul era, 1970s Ibanez.
Yep. So what happened was they got sued. They stopped making these. They started making the Ibanez artist.
But I mean, as guitars, they're at least as good, if not better, than the original Les Pauls from that era, right?
Well, the Les Pauls from that era were kind of terrible
Oh,
from the
okay.
70s.
Really?
So I mean, in general, yeah, that was during the period where the company that owned Gibson didn't give a damn about quality, and they were making these horrendous heavy guitars out of multiple pieces of wood and all of this stuff. Um, it was not, a period where they're very well known for having good guitars. By
What?
the way, 70s was bad for both Fender and Gibson.
Okay. I do remember reading that at one point the cheap, like the air quote cheaper versions that were made in Japan instead of the United States were better than the made in America Fenders and Gibsons.
Yeah, they generally cared more about the workmanship and about the quality. Um, every now and then Gibson would start getting good, and their guitars would start getting good, and they were doing things right, and you know they were making good guitars, and then some company would come along and say, hey, these guys are doing well, let's buy them and screw them up. And what they would do is they'd come in and they say, okay, you know we bought you, we don't know anything about guitar making, but you've got to cut costs. So stop using good wood, start using heavy wood. Start, instead of using a single piece body, instead of using a two-piece body, use a six-piece sandwich body, and
Hmm.
glue all these things together. And it's like, you see the guitars that Pete Townsend played, the Les Pauls he was playing in the 70s, the ones that you see on like the footage in The Kids Are Alright, where he's playing Won't Get Fooled Again, the ones that have the number on them, where he's playing number 6 or number 1 or whatever, with these Les Pauls. These things were like 13 pounds, and they worked for Pete Townsend, but you know these guitars were not really what the quality was supposed to be. And when we think of Les Pauls in this day and age, and what we want out of Les Pauls in this day and age, there were always exceptions, but those guitars in general were a really down period for both Fender and Gibson, the
Okay.
70s. Yeah, yeah.
Like the golden era was the 50s, right? For or like the
For collectability, for what everything is based on, with Les Pauls, the years are the 50s. Now, that said, there are plenty of crummy guitars from that period, crummy Les Pauls from that period, that collectors will pay a fortune for if they look right, but they might not sound particularly good.
okay.
But a lot of them were wonderful. And all of the reissue stuff for both Fender and Gibson harks back to those days. The reissue market of going back and sort of trying to make guitars in the way they made them back in the 50s and early 60s for Fender. Gibson, most of their reissues are 58, 59, 60 Les Pauls. Fender, their reissues are everything from 1954 through like 1962,
Okay.
and for Strats and Tellys, and they're trying to make them authentically like vintage guitars, and to a degree, the quality control now is better than it was then,
So
and
if you buy a new Stratocaster or Les Paul, you're you can be pretty sure that you're getting a great guitar. In other words.
certainly if certainly, I can tell you that I bought a $400 made in Mexico Stratocaster as a beater guitar about 10 years ago. And I've used it to death, and it's nothing special, but it's a workhorse. It stays in tune. You can't knock it out of tune. The pickups aren't particularly high quality. There's nothing about it that stands out. It's a good working guitar, and it's the kind of thing that I used to leave at my office, and if it ever got stolen, I wouldn't care too much, you know. But it I've also traveled with that guitar. I took it on airplanes, threw it in the overhead bin in a gig bag. It comes out. It's still in tune. It's you go and jam with people, or go sit. I'd sit in on a gig with a friend of mine or something like that with that guitar. It always did its job. It was a very good guitar for $400. In the 1970s, if you bought a $400 Fender guitar, it was a piece of shit. It was a total piece of shit. And it was, often true of the quality control of Gibson as well. And I have on the website, there's an article on some of this in the interview section. And generally speaking, the quality control is much better these days. So if you're talking about, the golden age of this or that, the most prized, vintage guitars will still go for 6 figures in Gibson, and certainly 5 figures in, in most Fenders. But these days, the guitars that are coming out of the custom shops of both of those companies, the custom shops, mind you, are pretty damn good.
What's the difference between a custom shop and a a regular model?
Just more quality control, more care taken, more time on the instrument. If you think about it, how long it takes, for example, to just finish the ends of frets. All right. If you run your fingers down the edge of a guitar neck, and if you can feel the frets sticking out or jagged or pointy or anything like that, they haven't been done well or something like that. It takes several hours per guitar to file those things down by hand, right?
Right.
So it's labor intensive to do that. And you think about, like, how many hours can they realistically spend on each guitar in assembly and construction, even on an assembly line, right? So somebody's doing the bodies, someone's painting the bodies, someone's doing the electronics, someone's attaching the neck, someone's doing the inlays.
Yeah,
all of that.
I've been to the Gibson factory in Memphis where they make the hollow bodies.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool to see. Like there's different stations where they do the painting, they do the neck, they do everything.
Yeah, one guy might just do the inlay on the neck, or one guy puts the frets in and stuff like that. So it's like, so that was not what you saw. Is not the custom shop. What you saw is the regular plant.
But there was still like more than 100 hours on each guitar, and
really,
yeah, that's what they said. And they were making.
if it's hollow bodies, it's going to be more, because you're bending wood and all of this stuff. To make a hollow body guitar, you have to
I think it was like 130 hours or something, like
yeah. For solid body electrics, it's nowhere near that, because you're cutting the piece. A machine cuts the body shape out and routes it and everything like that, and then you're not having to do all of that work you do on an acoustic and stuff like that. So the custom shop, generally, they just take more care. You're paying for more money for those guitars. They're more authentic. They're authentic down to using like hide glue to join the neck to the body in the Gibson case. In the Fender
hide
case,
glue.
Yeah, you used to talk about horses would go to the glue factory.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. So, they make the glue out of like, old horse hide or whatever, or something like that. Yeah. So back in the 50s, that's what they had. Now they have all these kinds of synthetic glues and stuff like that are probably much better, really. But, if you're going for that true authenticity, there are people out there saying, the hide glue is going to make a difference if you glue the neck on with hide glue or something like that. So the custom shop will do stuff like that. They'll go back and they'll figure out what capacitors did we use in the circuit in 1959, and they'll try and get the same kind of capacitors and put them in. Little details that only really matter to like this nerd appeal in some respects, and generally speaking, also the quality of the finish of the top. When you're talking about those things,
right?
When I told you I had a Gibson SG that was a Tony Iommi SG. all of the inlays were sterling silver cross inlays.
Wow.
So someone had to cut out, probably with a machine, but someone had to cut out all these Gothic crosses of every size, all the way up the neck, right, and inlay them into the neck and stuff like that. So they are the ones doing. They're theoretically a custom shop, even though they're producing, guitars of off the line. Theoretically, they're using the higher quality woods. They might still have some Brazilian rosewood to use on a fingerboard as opposed to the Indian rosewood that everybody's using these days. You might get, some higher quality stock. For example, you might get a higher figure of maple on the maple top. Instead of having like a AAA maple top, it might have 4 or 5A maple top, which is really highly figured.
Okay.
Better piece of maple or something like that. So.
But why? Sorry.
I know, like, for example, the Fender Custom Shop bought up pretty much all of the lightweight swamp ash that's available in the American market these days. You can't get it anymore to build Strats.
Wow.
They most Strats were either made out of southern swamp ash or alder, and back in the day, I could get I could call up Warmouth and say I want a swamp ash body that weighs 4 pounds or less, and they'd go find me one. And now the guy who's done a couple of my recent guitars, which are custom Super Strats, I have a friend in California, he's on the site. He says you can't get the swamp ash anymore because Fender's bought it all up. So
wow.
The Fender Custom Shop guitar is coming out. You might get a Strat that weighs 7.5 pounds. And everybody else is going to weigh 8 pounds or more.
Huh. And what's the reason why certain woods are very popular? Like you got elder, you got maple, you got ashwood, and
they all have different tonal characteristics. And there's, again, on the website, there's a place I have a guide for that. Let's see if where I have that.
Is it in the knowledge base section?
It's in the knowledge base, yeah. Let's see if I can find it. It's our construction tone woods.
I said it last time, man. This website would make an awesome coffee table book. If you add some good photography to that.
So if you go to the knowledge base and go to guitars and then tone woods, this is a pretty good layout of the kinds of woods that are in guitars, and it describes some of their tonal characteristics in length and
elder, swamp ash, mahogany, walnut, koa, corina, soft maple, hard maple, spruce, let's see, lacewood.
Yeah, this was not my actual article. I basically found this somewhere. I guess it was originally posted on the Gem site, and it was written by a guy named Frank Falbo, and I was so impressed by it. It was better than most of the ones that I've seen. So I contacted this guy and I said, "Would you mind if I reproduced it on my website?" I think it was fantastic. It's the best one I've seen. So
cool.
if you go to Warmouth, you'll read something similar to this, but this one was better, I thought.
Gemsite.com.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still there, but
it looks like a forum.
Yeah, it was. So
still
the guy
is.
posted.
Pretty active,
Yeah.
It looks like.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know if this article is still there. This guy wrote this thing, and
All right. What about guitars that are made out of plastics and synthetic? I think Yamaha made a couple of those.
Yeah, they're not really renowned for tone. They were a cool thing to have at one time. Keith Richards had a lot of them. The clear plexiglass.
Yeah, where you can see the wires and electronics and stuff.
Dan Armstrong guitars. They tend to be heavy. They tend to be not particularly great sounding. Um, I think guitarists in general, where gear is concerned, tend to be very conservative and stick to tried and true kinds of things. And if these things had sounded better, I think they would have taken off, and you'd still see them a lot.
Right.
Because they're a lot. They'd be, be a lot cheaper to make a plastic body guitar than, to use all of this wood. And a lot of this wood has gone scarce. There are, you don't get Honduran mahogany anymore. You don't get Brazilian rosewood anymore, and you can't get those things because they're in rainforests and stuff, and they're protected, and to a degree, rightfully so. But you know, if people come along and build synthetic guitars and they sound as good as the ones being made of wood, I think you'll see that trend continue. There are guys making them out of carbon fiber. The whole guitar weighs like 4.5 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Now, that can be very appealing as you get older and, the weight of the guitar starts to be a factor in your life,
Yeah.
But, as long as it sounds good, I don't think people are going to care.
Have people made guitars out of, like, I'm sure they have, out of weird materials or like steel or metal or aluminum?
There's if you go on YouTube, there's some interesting articles. There's a guy who just made a Strat out of concrete. Thing weighed 19 pounds. Yeah, and then there's a guy who like, there's guys who they're taking like, hundreds and hundreds of colored pencils, and they're embedding them in epoxy resin and making them out of like colored pencils cut into the shape of a guitar. And those things are fun and they look cool, but I don't see guitarists en masse really gravitating to those kinds of things. They're kind of one-off kinds of things.
Right, like gimmicks.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think I found it. This dude actually made a guitar out of concrete. That's awesome.
Yeah. The best one I saw was this guy who took tons and tons of ramen noodles and he embedded it in epoxy resin and clear epoxy resin, and he made a Strat out of ramen noodle. He made a ramen noodle Strat, which I thought was fantastic. But yeah, this, it's like you lost me at 19 pounds, pal.
I mean, it is certainly unique.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess the answer is just because you can, but,
And ring that little
so there's
notification.
lots of these things out there and stuff, and people making guitars out of weird things and stuff. But,
It's a ramen noodle guitar.
yeah, that was hilarious, but I don't think it's a video. I think it's just oh, maybe it is. There it is. The guy built it out. Yeah.
Well, you can do so much with, just put it in epoxy.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this thing. I was like, I would have that. It's like that is awesome. I would play that.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. It probably sounds terrible, but
I mean, if you show up with that to a gig, I mean, you're the only one.
Yeah, you're the only one having that. Yeah, I thought that was fantastic.
See, I want to see the finished product. That's so funny. That's ridiculous.
That's very cool, though.
Yeah. I think I also saw a guitar. I think it was even a signature model from one of the guys from The Offspring. They wrapped it in duct tape and then put epoxy over it.
Sure. So to sort of wrap up this thing, as what we've been talking about, this has been, if you believe it or not, we've been talking for 3 hours, but this is still just an overview.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to it than all of this, but my thinking here was that if you're listening to this and you're starting down this path as someone who is beginning, it's more important to understand rather than specific brands and specific models, what things are actually creating the tones. So that if you are, if you are a fan of a certain player and you want to go for that kind of sound, you should look at what kind of tubes they're using in their amp and what kind of pickups they're using in their guitar. Because if you can't afford, at this point in your life, if you're 16 years old and you can't afford a Marshall and you can't afford a Les Paul, there are other ways to get that sound if you sort of look at what are the components that are making up those tones.